Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Peace's guest speaker series as we've been talking to paralegal and lawyer bencher candidates about the upcoming election. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Peace's Trias College, or any other education institution or organization I'm affiliated with. Continuing our series this evening, we have Barry joining us. So, Barry, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me, and perhaps maybe we can get started by you telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Well, I went to Ottawa U for my law degree as a mature student, actually. A few years after I had been working for the federal government, I got my LLB, as we called it back in those days, in 1980, and I got my call to the bar, as we termed it at the time, in 1982. Over the past 41 years, I have been practicing in a private practice in Toronto, first at mid-sized firms, then moving up to national firms. And in the last 18 years, I have been in a solo practice. And during all that period of time, my practice has been limited to tax and estate planning, estate administration, and the mediation of estate disputes. In fact, I was a bit of a pioneer in the mediation of estate disputes. I was doing it in the late 1990s, well before they amended the rules of civil procedure to make mediation mandatory in estate disputes in Toronto, Ottawa, and Windsor. I like to think that I have given back to the profession. I've been a chair of the Canadian Bar Association Wills and Trusts Section Executive Committee, and also been chair of the Ontario Bar Association Trusts and Estates Section Executive Committee. Over my years in practice, I have presented dozens of papers as part of CLE programs, and I've written hundreds of articles on tax and estate matters. I was the editor-in-chief of the Estates, Trusts, and Pensions Journal for 15 years. I was a founding co-editor of a monthly newsletter called Money and Family Law. That's been in publication for 36 years now and running. As far as the Law Society involvement is concerned, I was an instructor for the bar admission course, as it once was. I was a member of the Law Society's Professional Standards Committee that developed a checklist, not well known to anybody, a checklist for practitioners in estate planning and estate administration. For about 17 years, I was maintaining and updating some of the licensing materials for the Law Society to help candidates prepare for their licensing examinations. And the area was, of course, in estate administration, estate planning, and estate administration. And perhaps as penance for doing that, I spent the last dozen years tutoring licensing candidates who failed that part of the course. I have sat on the Estates Subcommittee of the Civil Rules Committee for more than 25 years. And in the last 15 years, I was actually the chair of it. And in terms of community involvement, that has included in the past and continues to include sitting on the board of directors for a number of not-for-profit organizations and charities. That's my thumbnail sketch.
Now, Barry, certainly a long history there, lots of different things you've done over the 40 plus years, I guess I can say now,
Yes.
in the profession. Next thing that you might be on your agenda, if elected, is becoming a bencher here of the Law Society. So what motivated you to run in this upcoming election?
Well, first of all, I'll say it may be a bit strange that after so many years in practice, being in the latter stages of my career, that I'm actually running for bencher. However, you and all your viewers who've been watching these interviews will know that I'm not the only one in my senior years to be running as a candidate for bencher. I'm going to identify two decisions by the benchers that I can talk about. The first one is the one that started me thinking about running for bencher. And the second one is what persuaded me that I really had to do it. The first one was a vote at the May 26th, 2022 convocation that would have scrapped the certified specialist program in its entirety as of September 1 of 2022, thereby preventing any lawyer who aspired to a higher level of practice to gain that designation. And it also voted to strip almost all existing certified specialists of the right to continue to use that designation after 2022. And won't surprise you to hear, I'm one of those certified specialists. I found it interesting. They did a roll call vote of this resolution. 50 benchers voted in favor of it, 1 abstention, and nobody voted against it. And I won't even talk about the conflict of interest issues that are associated with that decision. Well, that decision led to an uproar, certainly among the certified specialists, and there are more than 750 of them. I took the initiative of distributing a petition to all of them who were threatened by this decision. And I was very pleased to have, I think 550 of them sign it, send it back to me, and I submitted it to the benchers. And as well, the benchers received letters from individual certified specialists who wrote very impassioned letters, and I've read a number of them, as to why the certified specialist designation was so important to them in their practice. Well, evidently, this response persuaded the benchers to revisit the issue. And so both as to the fate of the certified specialist program and the fate of the hundreds of existing certified specialists. They voted at their September convocation last year to postpone the elimination of the certified specialist program until the end of 2023 and to allow certified specialists to continue to use their designation until the end of 2024. They also tasked the Professional Development and Competence Committee with reviewing the matter and reporting back to convocation before the end of this year with its recommendation. In my view, this is only a reprieve for the program and for certified specialists. I believe there's a serious risk that this Professional Development and Competence Committee is going to recommend to convocation, when they bring it back, that there be no further postponements beyond the periods of time referred to in the in the September convocation vote. And now, this isn't a forum for the discussion of that issue, but all I will say is, if I'm elected as a bencher, I'm hoping to be able to persuade the benchers to preserve the certified specialist program and the certified specialist designations. So the second decision, this is the one that put me over the edge, was, and I'm not alone in my outrage over this issue, was the decision to approve a particular third-party provider of software. It was part of the Law Society's Access to Innovation project. It's a 5-year project. Sometimes it's referred to as A2I. According to the Law Society website, A2I is a 5-year pilot project which allows providers of innovative technological legal services, or ITLS, to serve consumers while complying with operating conditions that protect the public. Again, according to the Law Society website, these providers who want this approval have to demonstrate that they provide a sufficient quality of service while mitigating risk of harm to consumers. I'm going to repeat that. While mitigating risk of harm to consumers. Keep that in your head. Again, according to the website, the A2I team monitors the participant during the operating period and takes action if serious problems emerge. Remember that phrase, if serious problems emerge. Well, the first approved software provider, the software enables members of the public to create a will without any involvement of a lawyer at all, let alone a capable estates lawyer. This software, simply put, is going to provide a user with what the user wants and not necessarily with what the user needs. The third-party provider is not going to be providing samples of the wills that the users produce using the software to the A2I team. How is the A2I team going to assess the harm caused to a user? And suppose the A2I team did get samples of the wills that were produced for different people. Even a skilled estates practitioner, and I don't know whether the A2I team has anybody in that category, without being armed with the individual's personal and financial information, can't possibly tell by looking at the will whether there are problems lurking in the background. They may be able to identify, contradictions and obvious omissions and ambiguities, but beyond that, they can't do anything. And that's what I tell my clients when they say, can I send you my will and look at it and let me know if it's okay? So, bluntly stated, the damage that's going to be caused for the users of this program is going to emerge when the user dies. Now, the other concern I have with this particular decision is what's going to happen to the estates bar in the long term if this software keeps getting renewals, as it comes up for renewal currently, I think is every 2 years. If they keep on getting renewals, every survey that's ever been done of Canadians says that that 50% of Canadians do not have a will. Consistently over the decades that I've seen these surveys. Well, clearly that is an area that would be of interest to a lawyer to develop as part of an estates practice. And all you have to do is look at the demographics of the baby boomers who are aging, and I'm one of them. But why would somebody want to enter that marketplace if the main competition was coming from software that would enable individuals to create a will for a few $100s and, according to the software provider's website, would allow people to update their will in an indefinite, as many times as they wanted without paying any more? So that said, what I have little doubt about is that estate litigation will have an even brighter future than it does now. This is just the first third-party provider in the A2I project. So I wasn't involved in it, obviously. I don't know whether they addressed any of the issues that I mentioned. But if I'm elected as a bencher, I will aim to ensure that more critical thought is brought to bear in considering future approvals of providers of this intellectual, technological legal service. Seems to me that both of these decisions evidence flawed reasoning by the benchers, or more likely, flawed reasoning by the committee or the task force that ended up producing a report that was brought to the benchers to vote on. But as I said, taken together, these are what pushed me to throw my hat into the ring. Now, they are not the only concerns I have about the way the Law Society is regulating lawyers and paralegals in the public interest. And to be honest, I have spent a fair amount of time educating myself by looking at the election statements of the 103 lawyers who are running for benchers in this election. And I have been alerted to some other important issues with which I concur. And if you like, I can talk about
Yes.
some of them or let you stop and
Yeah,
interrupt.
I guess let's maybe look into maybe some of those other issues, or we can follow up certainly on those that you brought up as well. The big one that comes up obviously in this election, without even maybe it's not even an issue, it's just the election itself,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
how it's being contested, right? I mean, and certainly, you probably can remember back to previous bencher elections. I don't know how far back, but it seems to me obviously that this is the first major one where you have two sort of like groups or coalitions or teams or however they want to call themselves, the full stop and the good governance groups, and the issues of slates and running together, and now as an independent, as an affiliated candidate, it's a lot different of a dynamic than even the last election and certainly elections before it. So I wanted to know if you have any thoughts in terms of the sort of coming together of these respective groups, and how that's impacted the the election process, and certainly even the way we pick our benchers. You mentioned 53 people in total, right? That
Sorry, I think there's 103 candidates running for the.
Yeah, I mean, but 53 will be
Oh, pardon me.
benchers
Yes.
in the end,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
40 lawyers, 5 paralegals, and 8 lay benchers. So
Mhm.
I mean, I
Right.
don't know if you've given thought in terms of how we go through the election process with those things to keep in mind, and if you've got any thoughts on concerns and possible changes or fixes.
Right. Well, I think most people agree that the only reason there are two slates now is that there was one slate in 2019, and all of the people on that slate, coalition, whatever you want to call it, were elected. And the Good Governance Coalition came into being to make sure that that outcome didn't repeat itself in the 2023 election. I have a big problem with slates. And you mentioned the toxic environment, and I was going to talk a little bit more about that when, a little bit later on in our discussion. But one of the things that, two things I'll say, is what I'm hoping the benchers will do, whoever gets elected, is to abolish slates and say you cannot run as a slate. You run as an individual. You may have, goals and objectives in common with a lot of other people, but that should have nothing to do with how you run. And one of the things that really concerns me, and I'm surprised I haven't heard anybody else talk about it so far, is financing. If you go to the website of each of the coalitions, there's a button you can click on that says donate. There's no limit on how much money people could contribute. Maybe they just like the people who are running the principles for which they say they stand. But, there's campaign financing laws in place in the political arena, and they're there for a reason. To me, the whole notion that you can have unlimited financial support from anonymous third parties. Now, they may not be anonymous to the coalition, but they're certainly anonymous to the rest of us. And my concern would be that there may be organizations out there who want to curry favor with the benchers. And I'm sure the benchers will rise up and say, no, our fiduciary obligation is to the lawyers and the public, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, there ought to be a very strict limit on how much money any individual bencher candidate can spend. And I'll just mention, you've many people have seen the ads in the ORs, from both coalitions throwing dirt at each other. They can afford it because there's so many of them running together. The independents, I think there's 31 altogether. they can't match that. What I did together with 11 other of the independent candidates in Toronto, we pooled our resources together and said, you know what, we'll put an ad in the ORs. But otherwise, the dollars and cents are just outrageous. And that's the reason why I think, first of all, eliminate the candidate slate so that they can pool their resources. And secondly, have absolute, if you can spend, and also if you can spend the money, indicate you'd be obliged to disclose to everybody how much of it was your own money and how much of it came from other sources and what those sources were. So.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting, Barry, because it did actually come up for the first time today morning. I was talking to one of the Good Governance Coalition candidates, and they brought up that the donate now button, and I believe they said that they only took donations from licensees. But as you point out, we don't know that, right? They can certainly say it, but there's no disclosure requirements, like you point out in federal elections, provincial elections. And even what we just talked about before, about, like, for example, this will software, right? That, hey, if they wanted to back a big group and they say, here's, $1 million, do what you want to get elected, and then it's up for its renewal. Well, I mean, there's a conflict of interest. I mean, that would perhaps have to be declared, but no, it raises those kinds of issues, right? Of the who's kind of involved there, and certainly even if it's just coming from big firms, right? That doesn't kind of really level the playing field if you're a sole practitioner and you're running in unaffiliated and there's all these other people there. So, I mean, other than you suggested, obviously, just banning slates, making these publicly available, anything else in terms of the process there that you found in running this time that you think may be able to be changed in future for the next elections?
Well, as I said, I think getting rid of the slates, to me, would solve a great deal of the problems that have arisen, excuse me, with this election.
Now let's go back maybe to those points you brought up before. I mean, do you have any thoughts there in terms of maybe the processes, or again, looking at it from the perspective of not being a bencher and not being on those committees? Because as you point out, if you make a decision and then you have to walk that decision back, reevaluate it, there's a lot of time and obviously costs to that as well. But the importance of getting a decision, whatever the decision is, whether it's about access to innovation, whether it's about the certified specialist program designation, whether it's about anything else, do you have any thoughts in terms of maybe something that the law study might not be doing in terms of that process within a board, or have you given any thought of how did they come up with this decision and why do they have to kind of walk it back? Anything there you'd elaborate on, Barry?
Well, I mean, I think consultation, obviously, in the case of the certified specialist, didn't happen. Or there wasn't sufficient consultation. Everybody who read the outcome of the convocation was blindsided by it. All the certified specialists, certainly. So it seems to me that they have to do a better job of consultation. And I know it's difficult because, you send out an email and nobody answers it. Well, does that mean nobody cares? It may be that everybody's too busy, or they don't understand some of the implications of where things might go. I mean, I don't know at the very beginning whether people understood that the competency task force, whose report gave rise to the recommendation that ultimately was voted on at the May convocation, whether anybody thought there was a risk that their certified specialist designation might be stolen. So it's difficult, I know. And, the benchers have only a limited amount of time. I'm sure that they rely on staff to get information for them that helps them make that decision. I don't have a perfect answer, but they've got to try harder to get the right information that helps underpin the recommendations they're going to make. And in my view, they failed on both these occasions. I don't have a prescription for how they might do it differently. They just have to do it better.
Now, Barry, you mentioned as well that there was a couple other issues from going through the 103 other candidate profiles there. If there's anything you wanted to briefly touch on that are also important to you and you'd like to share with the people that are listening.
Sure. Well, law libraries, they are critically important to lawyers across the province, and they need stable funding from whether it's the Law Society or the Law Foundation, stable funding indefinitely into the future, not to have to worry that next year their funding is going to be, or their budget is going to be cut. And so I think the Law Society has to do whatever they have to do to juggle the budget to make sure that law libraries are properly funded, not only to do what they have to do now, but what services they may provide in the future as technology evolves. Second thing, legal aid. It's been underfunded almost from the beginning. And I know the Law Society isn't the one that makes decisions about that, but they need to do whatever they can to have the strongest possible voice to project to the Ontario government to say, we need funding. I mean, their statutory obligation, is to further access to justice by the public. How can they do that if legal aid funding is as minimal as it is? The only other thing I think of, and I really don't have any answers for it, but new calls are all coming in with staggering debt in many cases for sure. They don't all have their parents to help them. When I went to law school at University of Ottawa, the fees were less than $1,000. I looked on the website today, a year. The website today, $20,000 a year. And that's if you're a Canadian citizen. If you're not a Canadian citizen, try tripling that number. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe it has to be restructuring of the annual dues, something more to try and help the new calls with the debt they're going to be facing.
Now, Barry, last couple of questions, because you're just perfect that you mentioned new calls and new licensees. You have, again, 40 plus years of practice experience here. There's a lot of people that are getting into the profession, certainly with higher debts, as you pointed out, or students that may be listening. Do you have any advice, any words of wisdom as they look to transition and get into the legal field?
Well, I think there's three things to suggest. Number one, don't be shy about seeking out advice from experienced practitioners. We're all more than willing to share what we've learned over the years with new calls, with articling students. In my own practice, I get phone calls all the time from them. They're wrestling with a particular legal issue, and I'm happy to share my time with them. I don't look at my dockets to worry about that. In my experience, the estates bar as a whole is extremely collegial. Nobody thinks twice about calling up another one, and I'm sure that's true for the articling students and young lawyers as well. And I'm sure it's true of all the other practice areas. So seek out advice from experienced lawyers. That's the first thing. The second thing is get involved with the Ontario Bar Association in the sections where you have a practice area, or you're going to expect you will have a practice area. You'll learn about cutting edge issues. You will rub shoulders with people in all ranges of practice experience, and you can't help but learn from them. Third thing, look for opportunities to become an expert in an emerging area of the law. I can tell you that when the Family Law Act came out in 1986, in fact, when it was a bill in the legislature some months earlier, I saw that it was going to have a huge impact on estate planning and estate administration. So I made it my business to educate myself about the matrimonial property regime and to study the statutory language. And then I was armed with the ability to go out and speak and write about this new legislation for the estates bar, in fact, for the family law bar as well. And the neat thing about that was that when you write and you talk about a statute that's brand new, nobody can challenge you with your view about what the legislation means because there hasn't been any case law yet. And so nobody can say, sorry, you're wrong. My speculation is just as good as anybody else's speculation. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you find an emerging area of the law, like a new statute, make it a point of educating yourself, become an expert, in quotes, and you will be the go-to person down the road, and people will come to you, and you'll get business from it.
Perfect. So Barry, last question, perhaps the most important one for anyone that's watching that has up to 40 votes in this election. Why should they vote for you, Barry?
Well, you touched on the toxic environment in which the two slates are running. If you watch the ads, email traffic, and other social media that I'm not even plugged into, you will have seen and heard and read how each coalition and all its members are saying, don't vote for the other coalition or this will happen. They're both doing it. And the biggest one is, if you value self-regulation of the profession, don't vote for the other side or you'll lose it. Nonsense. I don't believe that for a moment. The Ontario legislature has more things to do with all of its other headaches. They wouldn't touch regulation of lawyers with a 1,000-foot pole, in my opinion. The problem is, with all this toxic discussion, if you want to call it that, that's a genteel word, perhaps too genteel. What's going to happen is, after the election is over, there's going to be a bunch of benchers from each side, and that experience through the campaign is going to result, in my view, can't help but result in animosity, in tension, and disharmony at convocations and in the committees that are formed. And to me, I think I bring to the table a rational perspective, devoid of most emotion. And I think people like independent benchers are really going to be important to help the convocation function in a way that it wouldn't without people like me.
Perfect. So thanks once again, Barry, for taking the time and speaking with me this evening. And thanks for everyone for listening. Take care.
Thank you.